The late 20th century promised a new world, a world without borders, with the advancement of technology and the triumph of democracy. But in the shadows of this optimism, a new kind of war was brewing. A war unlike anything the world had ever seen. A war of ideas, led by a man who would become the #1 enemy of the West, Osama Bin Laden. This is the video that explores the rise of an empire of terror, its fall, and its immortal legacy. Osama bin Laden wasn't born in a cave. He was born into one of the wealthiest and most influential families in Saudi Arabia, the Bin Laden family. His father, Mohammed bin Laden, was a construction magnate with close ties to the Saudi royal family. Osama grew up with a Western education, but also with a deep sense of religion. He was a quiet young man, but his faith was unshakable. However, his path changed dramatically in 1979. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan for him wasn't just a geopolitical conflict of the Cold War, but an existential threat to the entire Islamic nation. Bin Laden, with his personal fortune, traveled to Afghanistan. He wasn't a soldier. He was a benefactor, an engineer who built tunnels, roads, and hospitals. But above all, he was a recruiter. He attracted idealistic young men from all over the world to fight against the Soviets, the Mujahideen. The United States and Saudi Arabia, for their own interests, financially and militarily supported these Afghan fighters. The CIA provided weapons and training, and Saudi Arabia provided the money. But the real seed of terrorism wasn't the weapon, but the ideology. Osama bin Laden, along with the Egyptian ideologue Ayman al-Zawahiri, forged Al-Qaeda, which means the base, in the mountains of Afghanistan. They had an army of experienced jihadists, but with the Soviets' withdrawal, they needed a new enemy. The new enemy emerged in 1991 with Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. Saudi Arabia, to defend itself, accepted military aid from the United States. For bin Laden, this decision was a betrayal and a desecration of the sacred soil of Islam. He, who had offered the protection of his army of jihadists, saw his homeland invaded by Western troops. From that moment on, his war was no longer defensive, but offensive.
You have declared a jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
The US government has committed acts that are extremely unjust, hideous, and criminal through its support of the Israeli occupation of Palestine, and we believe the US is directly responsible for those killed in Palestine, Lebanon, and Iraq.
In the 90s, Al-Qaeda carried out a series of attacks, but most were underestimated. American embassies were bombed. A US Navy ship was attacked. The West saw these acts as actions by an isolated criminal group. They didn't understand that bin Laden was playing a different game, a long-term ideological war. 9/11 wasn't the first act of terror. It was the culmination of a war the West didn't even know it was fighting yet.
Did we get on that? I had one.
The attack on September 11, 2001 wasn't just an attack. It was a spectacle of terror, broadcast live to the world. Bin Laden's goal wasn't just to kill people, but to spread fear and show the West's vulnerability. He knew the attack would provoke a reaction, and that reaction was exactly what he wanted. He wanted the United States, the distant enemy, to invade the Middle East, recruiting more young people to his cause.
Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice.
The U.S. response was overwhelming. With Operation Enduring Freedom, Al-Qaeda's leadership was dismantled. Osama bin Laden was forced into hiding. But it was at this very moment that the organization, instead of being destroyed, became even more dangerous. Al-Qaeda transformed into a decentralized network, a franchise model. Jihadist groups all over the world, with their own local motivations and agendas, began to pledge allegiance to Bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. This affiliation gave them prestige, recruitment ability, and access to a global funding network. In the Arabian Peninsula, the AQAP group became the most dangerous branch. In Somalia, the Al-Shabaab group became a dominant force. Bin Laden's ideology spread like a virus, and he, even in hiding, became the symbol of a global war. In 2014, the landscape of jihadist terrorism changed dramatically. A former Al-Qaeda branch in Iraq, disregarding the leadership of Ayman al-Zawahiri, rebelled and named itself the Islamic State, ISIS. Al-Qaeda attacked the distant enemy, the West, with large-scale attacks. ISIS, in contrast, had a more brutal and pragmatic approach. They wanted the near enemy, other Muslims they considered heretics, and sought to control territories to build a totalitarian state. The rivalry between the two organizations became an internal war. They competed for fighters, resources, and influence. ISIS proved to be more adaptable, using the internet for aggressive propaganda and to recruit followers from all over the world. Bin Laden's web, which seemed like the biggest threat, now had a rival that surpassed its brutality and ambition.
The United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama Bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children.
On May 2, 2011, a U.S. Special Forces operation raided the compound where Bin Laden was hiding in Abbottabad, Pakistan. He was killed during the operation, and his body was buried at sea. And Ayman al-Zawahiri died in 2022. Al-Qaeda lost its two main leaders. But jihadist terrorism didn't end. On the contrary, it became more dispersed and unpredictable. The Islamic State, although it lost its caliphate, continues to inspire attacks worldwide. And Al-Qaeda's branches, now without a central figure, remain active in various regions. Bin Laden's true legacy wasn't the creation of a group, but the dissemination of an ideology. An idea that became a virus on the internet and can be accessed by any radicalized individual, anywhere. Terrorism no longer needs a headquarters. It just needs an individual who is inspired by a video, who reads a manifesto. The enemy is no longer an organized army, but an idea that has become self-sufficient. Osama bin Laden is dead. Al-Qaeda has lost its leaders, but the war on terror is far from over. And perhaps the greatest threat is invisible, faceless, and nameless. Just an idea. And an idea is the hardest thing to kill.